Hi, it's V with Crafting Daily Dose, and today I have another alternative for the November 2022 paper pumpkin called From the North Pole. This is an interactive slider card. It starts out with a message, "Uh-oh, Santa Claus is coming to town," and then when you pull on the slider, it changes to "Ho, ho, ho," and "Merry Christmas." I love the glittery tag that was in the kit, so I've used it here. And then that same look gets carried to the back with the snowflakes. Now it's awesome that the October and November kits coordinated because I was able to borrow some stamps from last month's kit. So this sentiment here, Santa Claus is coming to town, is from the October stamp set. And then I made a matching envelope. And notice that the Santa Claus stamp from last month coordinates with the die cut from this month's kit. I'm excited to show you how it all comes together to create this card. Here are the supplies that I'm going to be using. I've got 2 pieces of basic white thick cardstock. The first one is 8.5 inches across by 5 1/4 inch in height, so it's a little bit shorter than what we're used to. This piece is going to be the slider, and it's 3 3/4 inches across by 4.5 inches in height. And then we're going to make some additional preparations to those pieces together. Now from the kit, I've got this little iridescent snowflake, as well as the larger glimmer snowflake and the glimmer tag. I've got the twine from the kit. You'll need at least 18 inches or more if you want a longer tassel. And the Santa hat die cut. Now I'm going to be using the Snowfall Accents puff paint to add some texture to the brim and to the pom-pom, but that's optional. I'm going to be stamping with cherry cobbler ink, which was part of the kit. But I also want to have black ink for some of the words, and I'll be using Memento Tuxedo black ink because I want to color some of them in with the light cherry cobbler blends marker. This ink is compatible with the alcohol base markers like this. If you want to use the Stampin' Right markers instead, then stamp with StazOn Jet Black ink. That's because this one is waterproof, and so it's good for water-based markers like this. If you don't have markers, you can use the watercoloring pencils, which is an economical choice. I also need just a little bit of tape. I'm using clear tape here, but it's not going to show, so really any kind of tape would work. To make the finger notch, I'm using this 1/2 inch circle punch, which is retired, but it's already in my stash. You can use any other similar punch or die. And also for my stash, I have something that creates a small hole to thread the twine through. If you don't have something similar, you could always use the pointy end of your Take Your Pick tool or something else that's pointy. Okay, we're ready to begin. I've got my trimmer out so that we can finish preparing the cardstock pieces together, starting with the smaller one. Now in the final card, it's going to be oriented this way so that the 3 3/4 inches is across the top and the 4.5 inches is down the length. But in order to cut it, we're actually going to turn it. So when we're cutting this, we want that longer side along the top. I'm going to place this at 1 7/8 of an inch. So here's 2 inches. I'm going back by 2 little tick marks, 1 7/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do a partial cut. I'm going to begin cutting at the top and go down to 3 1/4 inches. Oops, my paper slid there. There are notches on the side of the blade, and I'm lining that up with the 3 1/4 inch mark here on the guide. So this is what my piece looks like. And again, in the final card, it's going to be oriented this way. Here's the larger piece. As a reminder, it's 8.5 inches by 5 1/4 inches, and we're going to be doing both scoring and cutting on this piece. Let's start at the 4-inch position. We're going to score. So I'm moving this darker cutting blade out of the way, and I'm going to use the lighter blade to score. Next, I'm going to move to 4 3/4 of an inch. And here I'm doing a partial cut. I'm going to be cutting from 3/4 of an inch down to 4 1/2 inches. So I'm moving this out, starting at 3/4 of an inch right here, down to 4 1/2 inches. Now we're going to move to 7 1/4 of an inch, and in order to do that, I'm going to pull out my little swing arm so I can get the rest of the measurements. 7 1/4 inch. I'm going to be making that same partial cut. So from 3/4 of an inch down to 4 1/2 inches. I'm already at 4 1/2 inches, so I'm going to do that cut in reverse. Last move is to the 8-inch mark. And this time we're going to score. So move that cutting blade out of the way and go ahead and score. We've got these 2 parallel cuts here and then 2 score lines bordering it. Before I stamp this piece, I'm going to go ahead and fold along those score lines just so that it makes it easier to see. I'm going to do them as mountain folds away from me. And then I'm reinforcing those creases with my bone folder. Next, I'm bringing in the silicone craft sheet so I have a little bit of cushion underneath my paper, and also because I'll be stamping off the edge. Now I've got a little sticky note here that I'm going to use and put it at the top of these cut lines just so it gives me a visual guide so I know where I want to be stamping. You could also just lay down a scrap of cardstock or something like that just so that you can tell where the ends of those cuts are. I've got that Ho 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 stamp inked up with Memento Tuxedo black ink, and I'm going to stamp it a little bit below where my guide is. I'm also trying to center it horizontally between those 2 cut lines. Now I'll move the guide down to the bottom. Now comes the part where I use the sentiment from last month's stamp set, Santa Claus is coming to town. I'm doing this just above the guide and again centering it horizontally. I'm using the Ho 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 stamp again, but I'm going to turn it upside down so that I get O-O-O, but I'm only stamping 2 of these. So the easiest way to do that is to ink it up so that I'm inking from the edge and I'll only get 2 of those words in. Now I think that I cleaned off my stamp really well, but just as a little extra insurance, I'm going to move the sticky note so that it covers up my previous stamping so that I don't accidentally get ink over that. I don't really need to know where the bottom is anymore because this part has already been stamped. I notice I have a little tiny bit of stray ink here, and so I like to use the sand eraser, and most of that will come off. And I'll vacuum up the little bits so that they don't cause trouble. Now to get that striped border, I'm using the candy cane stamp from the set, but I'm only inking up the part that is straight. I've used this many times before, so you can see the parts that are stained right there. I'm not getting ink on these 5 curved sections. I'm stamping with cherry cobbler ink and centering this between the crease and the cut line. After I stamp the first section, I'm going to build on that going all the way across, and I'm doing that by overlapping the segments on the end. And the stripe on the other side is done the same way. If you want to, you can also make these same stripes on the envelope so that it coordinates. Just cleaning that off. Red inks tend to make a mess, and I don't want any stray ink on my project. Next, I'll color in the letters using that light cherry cobbler blends marker. Now we're going to stamp on the slider itself, and notice there are two sections here. One is a little bit shorter, and then we're going to stamp on this taller one that's going to be at the bottom. But keep in mind that when you pull out the slider, you're not going to see the whole thing. You're really going to see just part of this section down here. So I'm going to mark that off so that I know where I can stamp. When you pull the slider out, the part that you can see is just under 2 inches. So it's 1 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to mark out the 2-inch mark and then pull it back a little bit. So 2 inches on my grid paper, because each of these is 1/4 of an inch. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This would be 2 inches right here. And then I'm going to come down by just half of a square. So it doesn't have to be super precise. I'm stamping the Merry Christmas sentiment using cherry cobbler ink, but you can use your black ink if you prefer. I'm centering this horizontally, and I could have done a better job of centering it vertically, but that's still okay, as long as I still have room at the bottom for the little hole for my tassel. This part is optional, but I'm going to put some Snowfall Accents puff paint on the hat. I'm squeezing some onto the white areas and using the tip to spread it around. Next, I'm using my heat tool. You have to be patient here, but once it starts to dry, you'll see it puff up. For a while, it's going to look like nothing's happening, but then all of a sudden, magic. We're ready to assemble. I'm going to start by gluing the tag to the top section of the slider piece. I'm punching out that hole because I don't really need it here since it's not going to be seen, but it might be useful to have a small glittery circle for something else. And now I'm trimming off the ends that are hanging off the edge. Let's prepare the card base. I want to create a finger notch that is in the center of this panel along the bottom edge. So this is 4 inches wide. Half of that is 2 inches, so counting from that crease, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of those blocks. My center point is right there. It's going to meet up like this, and so I'm going to do it again so that I get the other side. Now, if this were the regular cardstock, I could probably do the 2 layers, but since this is the thick cardstock, it's just easier on me if I do it in 2 steps. Okay. Let's bring the slider back in and we are going to thread it into position. So I'm starting underneath here and I'm going to take just the glittery panel. I'm going to bring it up through the cut on the left and then slide it over and then bring it back down through the cut on the right. So it looks like this, and so you can see that it's covered up those words at the top, and then when we slide it down, it reveals that part and covers up the bottom instead. Now I'm going to turn this over, and what we need to do now is to tape these 2 ends closed. So I'm putting this in position so that it's centered between these 2 score lines, and then I'm going to get some tape. I've got a piece here, and I'm going to put that across the gap. Just like that. Now it's clear, so I know that that's kind of hard to see. I want to make sure that I'm not taping onto the card base, only these 2 cut ends of the slider. For extra insurance, I've got another piece of tape and I'm going to tape it from the other side. Now this shouldn't be visible, but let's double check. So I'm pulling it and looking on this side. Nope, can't see the tape, so we are good. Now we need to close this so that it creates like a sleeve around the slider. So to do this, I'm first going to cut just very small wedges on the ends here. Just very skinny triangles. I'm going to use glue, but tear and tape is another good option. If you're using glue, make sure that you're getting it all the way to the crease and all the way to the edges. Now I'm going to tuck this down. I can see I've got a big glob of glue there. So I'm just going to use my little scrap to scrape that off. And now I'm going to bring these ends together. Give that a good press and let it set up. So let's double check and make sure that our slider still slides and didn't get glued down accidentally. That's pretty good. So now I'm going to create a little hole. I'm just marking a guide for myself. I'm sorry this part is off camera. I'm just using that hole punch that I showed you at the beginning. I've got my twine here and I'm going to double it up and double it up one more time. And then I'm going to push this end with the 2 loops on it. I'm going to push that through the hole. I'm using the Take Your Pick tool to help me push the ends through. And now, even though each side has actually 4 strands, I'm treating it as if it were one big strand together, and I'm going to tie a knot. And then another knot. Once I've got my 2 knots in place, I can go ahead and trim off the ends of the loops and then trim the ends so that they're even. So you've got a little tassel there. I'm going to use some mini glue dots here to attach the Santa hat to the slider. And then another glue dot for the snowflake. Now make sure that you're putting adhesive on the plain side so that that way the iridescent side is going to be the one that shows on top. And I'm just going to tuck this underneath the hat so that it only partially shows like that. Now for the back. I'm taking that snowflake and I'm going to cut it almost in half. I'm going to go just on the other side of this line here. And then I'm going to glue it so that those cut edges are right at the edge of the card. And then the rest of the space here on the back is going to be where I can write a message. Double check the sides there and trim anything that's hanging off the edge, but be careful not to cut the fold itself. There's our finished card. We've got glimmer on the front as well as the back, and then of course that fun interactive message. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this dose of creativity. If you're interested in Paper Pumpkin but don't yet have a demonstrator, you can find the subscription link as well as all of my other links in the description box below. If you get a chance to make this project, I would love to see it, so share it in the Facebook group or tag me if you're sharing elsewhere. I hope to craft with you again next time, and until then, have a great day.